Greetings. Glad that you're able to be here again. We're going to continue on. We're just going to jump right into the reading because throat's a little off today. We stopped at page 17. We're going to continue. Like I said, this is a 500-page book. I don't think we're definitely not going to read all 500 pages because there's just some particular concepts that I want people to grasp. And then I'll probably start reading from the other text, Trapped in Rainbows, because I think you have to have a foundation to really grasp what is being said and how that, our behaviors and functions, as we read yesterday, a lot of this is based upon learned behavior or dealing with stress and the trauma of stress that can cause maladaptive behaviors. So just to have those things in mind. In other words, the more we repeatedly overreact emotionally to life circumstances, the more likely we are to overreact equally emotionally to those same or similar life circumstances in the future because of changes in our amygdala. These reactions can become adaptive or maladaptive. More likely the latter, as reacting emotionally subdues rational thought and authentic problem solving. That's very important. I'm going to read that whole thing again because these are concepts or processes that we want to really, really understand and overstand. Because if we don't, we're going to understand, and we don't want to have nothing over us by being under it. So we want to try to master certain things. And I think this work, and I hope you have went out and actually purchased the work, because this is just supplemental what I'm doing. And you really have to really read this for yourself to really grasp what the author is telling you, because there are a lot of technical things that is being said, and you want to be able to really internalize those things and take it, and be able to use them in your life, to really be able to take in the information and actually use the information, or, being able to see certain things that the information is presenting, where you can, make adjustments to your life and how things are affecting you, that can be adaptive or maladaptive, as the author is saying. In other words, the more we repeatedly overreact emotionally to life circumstances, the more likely we are to overreact equally emotionally to those same or similar life circumstances in the future because of changes to our amygdala. So that's learned behavior that you're repeating. We repeat things, and sometimes reading some things or listening to some people, you hear them repeat things a lot, but that is necessary because when it's things are being repeated, they're trying to really have the listener or the reader to really grasp and connect with that particular way of thinking. One author in particular, if you ever read Neely Fuller's work, He repeats certain terminology because he wants you to really sit with it and really let it, settle into your brain and sink in really good. And therefore, hopefully, through that repeated, information, you can, use it appropriately to make adjustments to your life. It's so good. I'm gonna start from the. I'm gonna start it again. In other words, the more we repeatedly overreact emotionally to life circumstances, the more we are to overreact equally emotionally to those same or similar life circumstances in the future because of changes to our amygdala. These reactions can become adaptive or maladaptive. More likely the latter, as reacting emotionally subdues rational thought and authentic problem solving. So we said again, once your brain hits a certain level of the stress hormone, your thinking goes out of the window. You can't rationally think. It just goes right out of the window. And that's why we should always try to maintain a certain level of control, because then we can think through and use our brains to resolve issues. That's something that Nellie Fuller talks about a lot. Resolving issues, resolving issues. Don't get yourself caught up in situations where you can't resolve an issue, that you get too emotionally, invested into something that you can't think. Thinking is very important. Terribly efficient, the amygdala can intuitively recognize associations between an incoming stimulus and a salient stimuli response. Patterns stored in our long-term memory and then facilitate a behavioral response that's stimulus based on pattern neuronal activation. Okay, I'm going to read that one again. Terribly efficient, the amygdala can intuitively recognize associations between an income stimulus and a salient stimuli response. Patterns stored in our long-term memory and then facilitate a behavioral response to that stimulus based on pattern neuronal activation. So basically saying you'll just, because you've acted this in a similar process in the past, and therefore you will repeat it because that's what you did in the past. And a lot of this stuff is happens automatic. Your brain and your body will go on automatic, and you'll do things that you probably wouldn't normally do if you had the chance to really think about it. And sometimes you will do it, even though you thought about it. So, but hopefully, it's nothing maladaptive, because that's what we're trying to, and that's what this book is really trying to help us to realize and look at, is the maladaptive behavior that really impact, not only your life expectancy. So we definitely want to work on more, positive, uh, type of situations to handle those negative situations. In many ways, the amygdala is the centerpiece of our survival-oriented brain. It is the region principally responsible for the fight or flight or stress response. Not only does the amygdala facilitate our response to potentially threatening stimuli, it also initiates the retention of effective, i.e., survival securing stimuli response patterns in our long term memory. So it's responsible for short term and long term memories and pattern behavior. The amygdala that they're speaking of. The amygdala automatically remembers what you did to survive, i.e., how we responded to threatening stimuli, and creates or strengthens neural circuitry to motivate us to repeat these emotions and behaviors without requiring rational thinking. The goal is to accelerate our response time to threatening stimuli and maximize our odds of survival by creating neural circuitry that enables instinctive reactions to ominous life circumstances. So, as I said, you want to, your brain goes on autopilot. And because if it's a threatening situation, it wants to hurry up and deal with that stress, that trauma. Because of its designed efficiency, the amygdala reacts to external stimuli emotionally much quicker than more rational regions of the brain can. Its speed comes from its ability to make decisions regarding our survival unconsciously. Humans can overrule our amygdala-based response to life-threatening circumstances, but that requires acknowledging the amygdala's priority of response as well as practicing mindfulness with regard to making behavioral decisions based on reasons rather than emotions. As I said before, and as he just said, we can overcome these things, but we have to be mindful, as he said. We have to have mindfulness. We have to allow ourselves not to get over emotional because those states clouds the judgment. No, it's hard. It's hard. It's easy to say, it's hard to do, but it's something you can work on. We all can work on these things, and become better. Not that you're going to be perfect, but you can be better. You can be more efficient. The survival orientation of the human brain makes this easier said than done. Being logical is not as hardwired in the human brain as fighting or fleeing or denying is. Or denying is. Oh, that's a great one. Yeah, people are quick to deny things. The emotional reaction we recognize as anxiety is ridiculously important to the amygdala. Often mistaken for fear, anxiety is more so associated with the anticipation of a future oriented threat. Unlike fear, which is a reaction to possibly being harmed in the present. Our amygdala is designed to remember the fear we have neurally associated, i.e., neural circuitry, is created or strengthened with a certain life circumstances and revisits that fear whenever we re-experience the circumstance. Thus, we establish a conditioned anxiety to certain tangible or psychological situations where it becomes harder to not fear them in advance. Our fear response, also known as the stress response, and the fight or flight response to the threatening stimuli eventually becomes fixed in our brain as normal and necessary. So basically, like I said, when you're constantly stressed, you're you get stuck. Your brain chemistry stuck in that heightened sense, and that leads to high blood pressure and other maladies that people get. The brain becomes fixed in our brains as normal and necessary. Why? Our survival, of course. Once we fear a situation often or intensely enough, our amygdala begins to condition our brain to believe that the situation is inherently dangerous and record the fear we felt about it. In other words, whenever we experience a reoccurring trauma, whenever we experience a reoccurring or traumatizing situation and typically react with the fear response, our amygdala forms an association between the situation and fear. The next time we're confronted with the situation, we will reflexively recall the fear we repeatedly or remarkably felt before and feel it again. We will automatically feel anxiety, and once we accept the anxiety or simply refuse to accept it, the neural association between the situation and this reaction is reinforced. And because this happens so quickly, we have very little conscious control over it. Oftentimes, even the anxiety, which inevitably becomes chronic, is unconscious. Can't control the anxiety. Your body just acts. That's like if you have an altercation with somebody at work, and then you see that person again the next day. Your anxiety it's just automatic. You can't. These are certain things that your body does. It's just automatic. You can't control certain functions. That's why it's always good to try to seek peace at all times or not be around stressful people. But I know at work that's harder said than done. Oh, excuse me, easier said than done. A chronically anxious brain houses an a chronically anxious brain houses an overactivated and hence changed amygdala. So here we go again. So not only the anxiety, the stress, all these things are constantly changing your brain to an unhealthy state, okay? Because these things play out in your body, unfortunately. This amygdala is on constant, albeit subconscious alert for possible danger and is vulnerable to perceiving or overreacting to dangers that may not actually be at all dangerous. The hypervigilant amygdala is constantly activating the stress response. Every activation makes a future activation much more likely as it becomes patterned neuronal activity. So every time we're stressed, every time we have to deal with white terrorism, Every time the microaggressions, battle fatigue, post-traumatic stress, our brain plasticity is stretched. Our physical health can be in danger. Ultimately, the stress response is stuck on, hence chronic anxiety. It gets stuck. You're always experiencing stress and it gets stuck. See, and the maladaptive behavior is what? Smoking pot, drinking too much. So that's maladaptive because we're trying to deal with the stress, the anxiety by doing these maladaptive things that are harmful. Former First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt once said that you gain strength, courage, and confidence by each experience in which we really stop to look at in the face. You must do that which we think we cannot. That's a heck of a quote there. And it's true. Read that again. You gain strength, courage, and confidence by each experience in which we really stop to look fear in the face. You must do that which we think we cannot. Chronic anxiety won't allow you to stop to look fear in the face. You're too afraid to even open your eyes. And if you don't stop to look fear in the face, then you'll keep recalling and believing in the fear. Michael Davis and Paul Whelan explained that a stimulus that predicts an adverse outcome will change neural transmission in the amygdala to produce the somatic, autonomic, and endocrine signs of fear, as well as increased attention to that stimulus. So basically, what he's saying there is that you'll experience the same fear. If you feared it the first time, you'll fear it again because it's a pattern, neuronal activity at that point. Because remember, these things are becoming like postmarks in your brain. Your brain is making a postmark of every event, especially when it's being caused by stress. So your brain is postmarking these things because if it has to experience it again, it can hopefully take care of it quicker. So remember, the brain is trying to keep you alive. That's its highest goal. Fabricating fear, anxiety may not be the amygdala's only function, but it is arguably what it does best. And it's done very, very efficiently. It's virtually automatic. The overactivated amygdala is persistently vigilant and sustains our attention on that which we fear, and the fact that we fear it more so than overcoming the fear, which we typically become convinced is impossible. And it doesn't require our conscious intent to do so. We might not even consciously realize we're afraid, but once we are, we start searching for stimuli to confirm our fear. Thanks to the human brain's natural confirmation bias. Adjacent to the amygdala, the hippocampus, a coupling of the Greek word hippo for horse and campos for sea. So yes, it's shaped like a seahorse, somewhat functions as its ally. The hippocampus is where, among other things, long-term emotional memories as well as recollections of repeated emotional responses are created and stored. The hippocampus connects emotions, most of which originate from the amygdala, to memories. Emotional memories are the easiest to retain and recall. We remember emotional situations better because we also remember how they made us feel. Yeah, it's like when you eat, say you had a great day. It was your birthday, let's say, and your significant person took you to a nice restaurant. That food was excellent. So you always have that as a memory. You always recall. Even if you would happen to smell certain aromas, that memory of that special day would come to your mind. So because it's tied to a strong emotion, as the author just stated. We remember emotional situations better because we also remember how they made us feel. The stronger and more negative the emotion associated with a situation, the stronger the resulting memory. And that is, like he says, is also you remember bad things more so than good things. We all remember bad things more so than good things. I still can remember when I was a kid. I was probably like 5 or 6 years old, and followed my brother to the park. It was late. It was late at night, but he was supposed to stay in the house. I followed him to the park, anyways, and I shouldn't have. But we got back home. Boy, I got the worst beating. Boy, it doesn't seem like his beating was too bad, but I remember mine. I got a really bad beating. Experiences producing survival-oriented emotions, fear, stress, or the most memorable because these memories are reinforced by the concurrent activation of the amygdala. It's only logical that a survival-oriented brain would be most proficient at recalling threatening experiences. This is valuable information. When information is deemed lastingly valuable, i.e., relevant to our future, the hippocampus connects the essential elements of that experience together and forms a permanent memory. Humans create permanent memories mostly to solve future problems. Memories are cognitively efficient. Memories typically become a guide for future survival-oriented thoughts and behaviors. I'm going to read that again. This is valuable information. When information is deemed lastingly valuable, i.e., relevant to our future, the hippocampus connects the essential elements of that experience together and forms a permanent memory. Humans create permanent memories mostly to solve future problems. Our brain is for solving problems, as Neely Fuller Jr. always says in his work, repeats in his work. Solve problems, solve problems, solve problems. I hear that on, on playback. Solve problems. That's what your brain is for. That's what we're here for. We're here to solve problems. Unfortunately, so many of us cause problems instead of solving problems. That's why I think this work is important to read, because I think it will assist us in solving problems. Everyone should have this book. Everyone should have this book in their home. I know everybody got a Bible in their home pretty much, but this is more important than the Bible, because this is telling you or explaining to you how your thinking operates. There's many things that the Bible talks about on how people behave. This tells you why people behave. All the Bible says is sin. No, it's not that simple. There's more that's going on. This is just like the Wizard of Oz. You know, when Dorothy and them went to go see the Oz, and to come to find out it was a man hiding behind a curtain. That's all it was. There's more going on behind the curtain. And we have to, this work is important. To get this work and to read it for yourself is more important than air, more important than eating. A byproduct of pattern neuronal activity, i.e., newly created or reorganized neural circuitry, memories, particularly emotional memories, change or represent changes in the human brain, specifically the hippocampus. We remember because our neural circuitry changes. Each memory primes the brain for a future experience because our neural circuitry has changed. Each experience changes your brain. Your brain is changed due to your experiences. And then your brain catalogs the information because, like I said before, your brain likes to put things in order. It doesn't like things out of place. We remember because our neural circuitry changes. Each memory primes the brain for a future experience because our neural circuitry has changed. Our thoughts, observations, emotions, actions, and overreactions are all influenced by what we remember of our past. That deserves a reread. Our thoughts, our observations, emotions, actions, and overreactions are all influenced by what we remember of our past. Our emotional memories also impact what associations we are most vulnerable to making and internalizing in the future. Yeah, you see that a lot when people make bad choices. Especially in the area of who we choose to partner with in our lives. Connected to the hippocampus near the front of our brain is the prefrontal cortex, which isn't Greek for anything, by the way. The prefrontal cortex, PFC, functions as the relatively logical decision maker of the trio. It determines what decisions we make in response to emotional reactions from the amygdala and the emotional memories from the hippocampus. The PFC slows down our otherwise automatic responses, e.g., stress, anxiety, just long enough so we can regulate them and not be completely impulsive. The overreaction of our amygdala and hippocampus concurrently underdevelops or reduces the neural functionality of the PFC. So basically saying the overstressing slows down your ability to reason. As the amygdala and the hippocampus are neuronally strengthened through repeated activations, e.g., being scared or stressed a lot, the prefrontal cortex is effectively weakened. So you can't think because the constant stress, and when you were able to think because of the constant stress, you can't think. So it's like a cascading event here. Because it's highly plastic and underdeveloped, prefrontal cortex can lead to very poor decision making with regard to emotional responses and an increase in emotional as well as cognitive and behavioral impulsivity. Having no control over oneself, impulsivity. I'd like to go back for a moment and reconsider the relationship between the survival-oriented human brain and emotions. Ulrich Wagner and others understood that human behavior is potentially guided by emotional process. Human behavior is potentially guided by emotional processes. Read it again. Human behavior is potentially guided by emotional processes. So there's a whole lot of people that do a whole lot of things without thinking things through. And that's when trouble ensues, unfortunately. However, cognition guides emotions. It's impossible to have an emotional response to a situation our brain doesn't perceive or an attempt to process on some level. I'll read that over again. However, cognition guides emotions. It's impossible to have an emotional response to a situation a situation brain doesn't perceive and attempt to process on some level. Fundamentally, emotions are distinctly patterned neuronal activity that we tend to demonstrate in reactions to external stimuli. They are triggered in the brain by perceptions, typically unconsciously. The primary function of emotions, as aforementioned, is to promote survival. Emotions were a necessary consequence of human evolution. Emotions are associated with areas or structures in our brain that focus our attention on the threat, prompt, or motivate specific survival-oriented actions and determine the threatening implications of the external circumstances of our lives. Emotions are perceptual, but they are also very personal, or rather interpersonal. Most emotions are expressed toward another person or social group. Human life is, on the most basic level, a series of interpersonal interactions. Bruce Wexler believed emotions to be an inter-individual process that alters the moment-to-moment function, organization, and activation patterns of the brain in individuals who are interacting. Interpersonal interactions is still oftentimes, albeit unwittingly, survival-oriented. It is a game of establishing and sustaining the social material advantage, much like chess, so that as an individual, initially at least, then as a social group, and ultimately a species, survival is secured. I'm going to read that again because that is very important to really grasp how I was just reading earlier in something else called it's an association called groupthink. Especially it's something that you see in a lot of religions, a lot of people who have been brainwashed. You can't function outside of the social conditioning of the group. You talk like them, you act like them, you dress like them, you think like them. So in the when people are trying to connect to others, they tend to lose their own self identity, and that's an issue. Bruce Wexler believed emotions to be an inter-individual process that alters the moment-to-moment functional organization and activation patterns of the brain in the individuals who are interacting. Interpersonal interactions is still oftentimes, albeit unwittingly, survival-oriented. Okay, so this is how you would see you see it so much in the animal kingdom, especially you see it in humans as well. But more in the animal kingdom, you'll see a lot of situations where the alpha male, is bringing the other males under his domination. Okay, so we see these play out, and also in the connections between human social groups as well, where you have the dominant male, and generally the others will fall in line under him. You know, you know, he'll use violence. He'll use sexual, degrading sexual uh, uh, acts and even language. So it's a lot of homoerotic things that go on in male, in our male misogynistic uh, social orders a lot of the times. So that's something that we have to really, that a lot of people don't speak on, but it is something that is very apparent. This book speaks about it. Well, you can see the foundation. His other book, Trapped in Rainbows, this author Joseph R. Gibson speaks on that homoeroticism part and how the inferiorization and the effeminization, how all that plays into this stuff. Okay, but as we see here, this is a ground level. This is a foundation building to let us see how these things and these interpersonal interactions, you know, are affecting, you know, and like I said, you're either having a maladaptive behavior or you're having adaptive behavior. Okay, and the maladaptive behavior plays out in these same social, what is you call it, social, psychosocial is another terminology that's used, a psychosocial order. Uh, but he used social material advantages. Okay, but it's the same type of thought process. I'm gonna read that again because this just fascinates me. So uh, Bruce Wexler believed emotions to be an inter-individual process that alters the moment to moment functional organization and activation patterns of the brain in the individuals who are interacting. Because in an interaction, a lot of times you're going to have people are trying to get over on others within the conversation. Okay, so these interactions are fascinating. I think because somebody's always trying to one up somebody, get the last. You'll see that where somebody try to always get the last word in. Okay, so that these things, and this is what makes this book, when you actually can see these things and human actions actually play out. So this is why I say this work is phenomenal. It's wonderful. It's so eye opening because you can actually read this, and then you can see the stuff actually play out in your day to day life, and you can actually relate to it. Now, sometimes the words and stuff gets a little, but it's not over the top where you can't grasp the concepts of what he's talking about. The interpersonal reaction is still oftentimes, albeit unwittingly, survival oriented. So when you're having an interaction with somebody, you're being selfish. You're going to be a selfish person to a degree. We're all so self-centered. I'm telling this is what this stuff is. This is really mind blowing to me. How our brains operate and it's funny. And I can see that in conversations I have sometimes with others, where you're trying to shine up the conversation like you know more than you actually know a lot of the time. So but that's self-oriented, that's survival oriented, self-oriented. You know, it's this stuff is funny to me though. It's a game of establishing and sustaining the social material advantages, much like chess, so that an individual, initially at least, then as a social group, ultimately a species survival is secured. So you're doing all these things to make sure that your survival is secure. And it's just funny because this is how your brain. Now, like I said, the scriptures, the Bible, not going to give you this type of in-depth to not only your brain, but his brain. All the Bible is going to tell you is right, wrong, and we know that. Sin, okay. You don't know what you do when you do it, like in Romans, okay. All right. No. We need solid, concrete, something that I can actually hang my hat on because they have studied this. And like I said, they know how the brain operates. They know how to make the car go. Okay. Just point blank it. Emotions are the key to reacting efficiently within the interpersonal interactions. Emotions allow us to rapidly recall past perceived challenges and opportunities along with our successful response to them so that we can repeat the response and its success rather than having to recreate it. Early in human history, emotions equipped man to victorious versus. Hold on, let me start that over again. Early in human history, emotions equipped man to be victorious versus nature, because as nature was tamed, emotions and emotional memories inevitably adjusted to function mostly to produce favor within man versus man conflict. The conflict became necessary once we all became convinced that somehow survival was only for the fittest, i.e., most advantaged. Thank you very much, Mr. Darwin. Henceforth, humans became justifiably far more afraid of each other than we ever were of anything nature could produce. Oh, oh, it was on now. Oh, it was on now. According to Catherine Cottrell and Stephen Newberg, emotions are critical to the natural goal-seeking process. They signal the presence of circumstances that threaten or profit important goals and direct and energize behavior toward the remediation of such threats or the exploitation of such benefits. Emotions organize and coordinate ongoing psychological actions, e.g., attention, motivation, memory, behavioral inclinations, so that people might respond more effectively to events related to individual survival and success. Distinct emotions are affiliated with specific psychological, cognitive, and behavioral tendencies, all of which operate to facilitate resolutions of the problem. I'm going to read that again. Distinct emotions are affiliated with the specific psychological, cognitive, and behavioral tendencies, all of which operate to facilitate resolutions to the problem. Your brain is for problem solving, not for problem creating. Because humans have long been ultra social, these valuable emotion-based psychological mechanisms likely became used by natural selection for the additional purpose of helping people protect valuable group resources and maintain the integrity of critical social structures and processes. Because human sociality developed to maintain individual gain, important tangible resources, e.g., food, shelter, and mates, we expect individuals to be most attuned to threats to in-group success when there are tangible outcomes at stake. These emotion-based psychological systems should therefore operate most powerfully within interactions between groups perceived to be mutually independent. That is, cooperating or competing to obtain valuable, tangible outcomes, e.g., as in interactions between white and Black Americans. All right, so we're on page 23. We're going to end right there, almost at an hour. I hope you found this informative. Please go out and get the book. The book is important. Reading this book is important. The knowledge in this book is important. I can't stress it enough. Please, this will help our people to hopefully to change our behaviors. How in the world we are the first people of this creation, and we don't act like it. We act like we're the last people. And if we keep acting like the last people, we will be the first people to be the last people. Unfortunately, because this is not a game that they're playing with us, and we have to wake up and start doing better as a group. Well, I thank you. Until next time, we'll be on page 23, middle of page 23. Have a good one. We're out.